patch 11.1 might just be favoring ranged DPS more, so we've played all of them on the PTR to see which one ranks the highest in fun against everything else, considering the reworks up to this point, the tier sets up to this point, and the dungeon tuning up to this point, because some of these are spicy. How spicy? Affliction Warlock spicy. This is a personal bias of mine, so I will treat it as such because pretty much this entire video was going to be very personally biased. But I am actually a fan of what Affliction used to be, aka Seed of Corruption spam, which was a more exciting way to deal massive AoE. Outside of that, I do have to say a couple of caveats. The Affliction Warlock rotation, if everything goes right and you have every mob in your Vile Taint, because this is mostly around Mythic Plus, but of course can apply to raids as well. But if you have everything in your Vile Taint properly and you set out a seed and everything has all the dots and then you can start actually doing your thing, it's super fun. However, that's not the case in a lot of the situations where the tanks cannot realistically pull everything in one tight little pack 100% of the time with every little pack, and there's bound to be one or two mobs outside of your area of effect that will not be dotted, so you'll have to manually dot. And if the pack doesn't die before the agony essentially drops off, you won't have Vile Taint right away to replace it on the minions, on the pack. And even if you do, it's likely that the pack will just die in 5 or 7 seconds longer, and the next pack will see you with your pants down to your ankles because you have nothing to do to AoE dot them. This is of course a problem that affects not just Affliction Warlock, and we will get to that in the future, but it is one of the biggest complaints that I have in trying to play this and actually enjoy it in a Mythic Plus environment. Outside of that, it's pretty fun. The hero talents are still doing a good job. We've talked about this for 5-6 months already, so it's not anything surprising. I will put it into... I'll put it into meh. It's fun, but the downside of maintaining the Vile Taint type effect up on the targets and the lack of Seed of Corruption just makes it a little bit... Augmentation is something that I have actually played in this PTR, which is not something I usually do because I don't particularly like Evoker, and I am slightly coming around, and it does have a lot to do with Scale Commander, what I've enjoyed on Augmentation the most, mostly because I really love steering my breath, Eons I think it's called. I keep wanting to call it Deep Breath, but it's not Deep Breath, it's Breath of Eons. Having to rotate Prescience can get tedious after a while, so I'm not a big fan of that. And I can start to see some of the complaints that augmentations have when they're trying to maximize the Ebb and Might uptime on the party, but then again, that is what augmentation is supposed to do, so you kind of have to have that expectation going into it. It's not a pure DPS class per se, but it has been more fun than I expected it to be. You don't have the Mass Disintegrate that's so cool on Scale Commander, but with Eruption is still pretty nice, so I will put it also a little bit behind Affliction, as opposed to the bottom of the list where it normally does end up in, which is not where our patrons end up in because they're at the top of the list, since they're actually supporting the content that you see right now, which is sometimes difficult to do on YouTube because YouTube doesn't really like all of the videos that we post out. And thanks to the support of our patrons, we can actually do them and do more and more in the future. And if you want to support your boys here to help us do more of the stuff, keep the lights on, all of the good stuff that you probably already know, head on to patreon.com/Marcelian_online. Not only will you be supporting us, you will be able to have access to videos early ahead of time. You'll be able to see bloopers of me and Marcelian fucking up on camera that you don't normally see because the edits are crisp. And you might also be the recipient of a 4K resolution, glorious wallpaper of awesomeness with your character's transmog on it. Once again, patreon.com/Marcelian_online. Thank you very much for support, and let's talk next about Balanced Druid, because I don't know the order, so I just had to look on the screen right now. Balanced Druid is kind of slightly, I don't want to say opposite, but despite the things that it has lost, it's still relatively fun. And I think that just has to do with the baseline kit of balance just being really enjoyable, where it's simple and satisfying. Spread your dots in AoE. It's still tedious, just like it is with Affliction, maybe even more tedious because you don't have an AoE application of your dots that sucks. That shouldn't be the case. At least maybe if we can get Orbital Strike, whatever the celestial alignment change to the big beam in front of you that normally puts Stellar Flare, if we can have that put all the other dots, that can make it a little bit less tedious, especially when you do big pulls and you want to just pump really quick, because having to tap target 7 times to put Moonfire out is so boring, and if I wanted to do that, I would just play Classic at the moment. Outside of that, building Astral Power, spending Astral Power is very satisfying. The fact that Starfall is not reliant on you putting something on the ground and things staying in that ground is very relaxing and very liberating, let's say. The fact that you're squishy is not, and having to go into bear sucks. I guess that's what the vision of the Druid specs is supposed to be, and that's where the main defensive will lie, because you cannot really do anything in bear. You can say the same about Turtle for Hunters. However, Hunters have way better defensives outside of Turtle that Balanced Druid does not have. Granted, Bear does not have a cooldown, but then again, you're not doing any damage. I digress. I still feel like Balanced Druid will need a little bit more to kind of keep up with what range specs do nowadays in terms of fun. I think taking away Arcanic Pulsar sucked, and it sucked mostly because we didn't really get anything back. Mushrooms are boring to play, and I'm hoping for more in the future. I will put it in front of me. I kind of wanted to put it in decently fun, but I feel like it would do a disservice to the specs that will eventually end up decently fun, that are actually decently designed. One such spec being Arcane Mage. And this is a little bit of a wild card, and that is because I like pain, and I like it to be inflicted upon me when I play World of Warcraft. I'm excited about the future of Arcane Mage, mostly because things are happening again to its talent. As of recording this video, I'm not exactly sure what the best way to play Arcane is, so I don't know the builds and all of the rotations. We lost Ether Vision as Arcane, and that kind of sucked because I like the gameplay implication of it, and I feel like in the process of simplifying Arcane for a lot of more players, the devs actually are complicating it even more. And every time they're doing one of these changes, they're complicating it even more, only to go back on these changes, and I think there hasn't been a single spec in the game that's been yo-yoed more left and right than Arcane has. Do we double dip? Do we not double dip? Burden and Power affects Barrage. It doesn't affect Barrage. Do we double dip into another Precision? Nope, we take a Barrage away. No, we put it back. So I don't know what the fuck. But it is still fun, and if plus a couple of changes have been made into the talent tree. I don't know if it's final because it's never final with Arcane, but if they can actually decide what the vision of Arcane is, it can be really interesting if you can actually play something like Arcane Explosion, which is like a dead spell on your bars. Not very fun to press anyway, so maybe we can make that fun. Maybe we can give Arcane Mana Sphere from Plunderstorm, just like how Windwalker received Slicing Winds from Plunderstorm. Wouldn't that be cool? That would be very cool. I'm just saying it would be cool. Plus, it gives you a little bit more utility and knock-up potential. But it is really fun. The flow of Sun Fury is really cool. What they did to Arcane Soul in terms of Sun Fury is very cool. It's also a little bit bugged, so if you're watching the footage that we have on the PTR, it's likely, and if the damage is very low, it's likely one of the bugs with one of the talents that's not doing proper damage. Don't look at that. It's not going to be that way up until it's released. But it is fun, and I kind of like it a little bit more than the other ones. Beast Mastery. Once again, depending on when you watch this video, you might be aware that Beast Mastery is broken on the PTR, and it's likely not going to stay that way. I'm just saying. Although it has a better chance of staying that way than most other specs, because Beast Mastery is the most popular ranged DPS spec in the game and the second most popular spec in the game, period, behind Red Paladin. So Blizzard will probably be more reluctant to nerf a spec that a big chunk of the community will end up playing. Outside of that, I don't know, bro. Pack Leader is so tedious and passive. It's better designed in the sense that it's an actual playable hero talent right now, and it does good things, but I just cannot tell. We've have a video on Beast Mastery. I don't know if it's gonna be live by the time you watch this, but it's just very tedious. It's doing a lot of damage. It lacks a bit of depth, but that's been Beast Mastery's thing for a very long time. I'm still not a fan of the fact that I have to spend, 3 talents to get my AoE, because you're never going to get multi-shot on its own. You're never going to get multi-shot and Beast Cleave on its own. You'll always have to get multi-shot, Beast Cleave, and Kill Cleave on its own. Now we have Dire Cleave, a new talent for your Dire Beast to do AoE that you're probably going to end up picking. I would be surprised if not. That would be interesting to see. But overall, it's still the same. I still feel like Dark Ranger might be the more interesting way of playing BM, and that's not saying very much. I will put it... Dude, I'm gonna put it behind Augmentation, man. I cannot believe it. I've had more fun on Augmentation than on BM, and I'm a Hunter player way before I'm a Lizard player, so I don't know. Demonology has changed a lot more since I last played it, and giving it a shot was one of the better things that I've done on the PTR. I've actually quite enjoyed it a little bit. I still feel like it's missing some potential depth and class identity. I feel like it's risking going into the passive route where you're pretty much playing the same rotation no matter what talents you pick, and the talents do really cool stuff, but they don't impact your rotation whatsoever, and it doesn't really matter if you track them or not. They just happen, and that's the same situation with Beast Mastery as well. I kind of would like to see Doomguard do its Shadow Bolt volley thing from the tier set that we had in Dragonflight. That was one of the cooler things. If it's going to be the single target option for it, I want it to be a little bit cooler. It's so passive. It's dope that you can see it there. That's a point in its favor as opposed to Beast Mastery, but I feel like it's all just way too passive. I will put it in front of Augmentation, a little bit behind Affliction, because I felt like Affliction had more oh shit moments than Demonology had, so I'm not sure if that's ever going to change. Destrolock is just the pure example of, hey man, I just wanna do some damage, man. And I don't know if I should put it in front or behind Arcane. I'm still debating. It's not as broken as Arcane, and it's not as complex as Arcane, but it is just the simple fun of destruction where you're just building soul shards and just spamming Rain of Fire. It's not superly changed. The tier set is pretty gnarly, but it doesn't really impact your build and or rotation. You might want to get the Channel Demon Fire talent that buffs it, so that when your Channel Demon Fire bolts shoot out, you, I think, refresh, immolate. But outside of that, I don't think much will change. It's the simple fun. Listen, if you're gonna do a spec simple, just do Destro, and that's fine. Fire Mage is something that I am very probably the most conflicted on this entire. No, it's definitely the most conflicted on this entire talent tree, because I don't like the vision of Fire Mage. Currently on the PTR, I'm not sure if this will change by the time it goes live, but on the PTR right now, you have one fewer Phoenix Flame charge, and Fire Blast has a longer cooldown because, and I quote, the devs don't like its mobility and that it's so high. I would argue that that's one of the main selling points of Fire, being so explosive and having such high mobility. And with these particular traits of Fire that definitely make it fun, people, at least the ones that I've talked to, definitely found it very fun because of how fast and mobile and how many instant casts it has. It still didn't make it overpowered or an overwhelming choice to be picked in groups, to argue that its design on mobility would impact the overall community. It does fucking not. Fire Mage has been more or less average this entire season 1 that is, and it's never been picked because of its mobility. If anybody picks Fire Mage over any other specs, it would probably be because its damage profile is very efficient. It can have some really good single target that splashes into AoE without almost sacrificing any single target damage whatsoever, and historically that's one of the main selling points that Fire has been taken into groups. Definitely not because of mobility, but hampering mobility makes Fire feel like you're running on a smooth surface and somebody's throwing rocks in your way and you're constantly tripping or hitting your foot on a rock. It feels terrible. It feels clunky. It feels unintuitive, and the change to Frostfire makes it a little bit tedious to juggle all the procs where you're going to cap procs inefficiently, and it, for a Fire Mage main player where I really want to play as optimally as possible because that matters on Fire maybe more than any other spec in a game, it feels terrible to play. I feel like this needs help. I wanted to put it at the very bottom of the tier list. It's not bad. It's still Fire. It's still pretty cool. But I don't like the vision of Fire. And if people like it, that's perfectly fine. Listen, you enjoy your Fire if you want to. I cannot. It's terrible, and it's been a spec that I've been in love with for the past 5 months. And this just got gutted in like 1 week. So enjoy your Fire. That's not my Fire. Frost Mage has received some cool changes on the PTR where Blizzard is now bigger and better. And the fact that, I do have to say that it's a minor thing, but Blizzard actually being a larger area of effect spell, if that's the right way to say it, actually impacts the visual quality a lot, and of course your AoE performance, since we know that tanks usually move packs around in dungeons. In raids it doesn't really matter that much most of the time. So having a wider area of effect on Blizzard is really cool, and if they keep pushing this Blizzard to be a really good spell to use for damage and not just synergy and procs and stuff like that, I am super down for it. Outside of that, not really much changed for Frost at all, which is a little bit of a bummer because Frost really needs to be modernized. It still feels like I'm playing a 2016 spec. Cold Snap is about the coolest thing you can do with Frost, and that's only in AoE, and the dopamine gameplay loop only happens on, I don't know, 8 targets or more, where you constantly get Frozen Orb resets and Blizzard resets, and that's mainly the main appeal of Frost that I would have. Definitely not in a single target. A Glacial Spike was fun once upon a time, but it's still the same thing, and it gets more boring the more I play it. I will put it in front of Demonology. I think I've been enjoying Frost a little bit more than Demonology, but it needs help. Maybe I should have put it next to Fire. Nah, it's doing better than Fire. Marksmanship. Oh my god, I have never thought I would ever put Marksmanship at the top of the list. I do have to say that its rework has been probably the best rework that any spec has gotten in a very long time. I used to think that was basically Fire's place, but with the recent changes to Fire, Marksmanship just overtook in terms of design, like leagues above. The way that they've taken some very basic concepts of Marksmanship, like precise shots, streamline, and I guess the new Spotter's Mark, the new owl thingy, and just baked them into 4 or 5 other synergies, talents, and spells, and kind of made it all like, oh, this procs this triggers that one, that other one triggers the on, and then comes back around and it triggers the first one. That is so fucking cool. And the fact that, at least on the PTR, with my dumbass brain, that I could see, oh, I could actually just build it in multiple ways and have different types of damage profiles in AoE and in single target is really cool. The fact that you have 2-target cleave after so many years is really cool. And I definitely dig the version of Marksmanship that the devs are seeing right now. I can only hope that it can be used as an example to design stuff like Frost Mage maybe, or even Beast Mastery to make things a lot more interesting. Marksmanship, creme de la creme, or whatever they say. Devastation was also a decently big surprise for me in terms of how fun it was on the PTR. I'm hesitant to put it into decently fun or meh. I'm not yet sure. I'm gonna talk myself into putting into one of those tiers right about now. I wanted to play Flameshipper a lot on the PTR, but no matter how I looked, I wasn't convinced that Firestorm is a good talent to pick. It's very unpopular, and the fact that it's still not used in the highest of keys and the highest of content where the Devastation is a big minus in terms of this. This spec is a new spec. It barely has any buttons. The one button that can do more AoE damage that you could take is not tuned. It's been overpowered. It was overpowered on the beta for Dragonflight, and they nerfed it into the ground, and that was, what, almost 2 years ago, and they haven't buffed it properly since, enough to be played in AoE, where you would think this is what you would be doing in AoE. And I do have to say that there's a big gameplay loop missing from Devastation that people could be enjoying with, I forgot which one. Pyre resets Firestorm, makes it instant, and you can place it. Probably does even more damage. The gameplay revolving around Pyre, that's really cool, and I was hoping to see more of it. And you can play it, of course, but the fact that it's very underwhelming doesn't really do much for it. But that out of the way, Scale Commander, like Augmentation, was really fun for me. I really enjoyed my little gecko, as much as I don't really vibe with the Drakthir thing. And Deep Breath being fucking available so often has to be the coolest thing that I can do on Devastation. And I don't know if I could play Devastation without Deep Breath. If you're gonna take, I don't know, 20-30 second Deep Breath cooldown for me away, you better give me Firestorm, and that's not what's happening right now, which is why I will be putting it in meh. Behind Affliction, above a lot of the specs, I would never guess that I would put it in front of. Elemental is a tricky one. I would put it super high up in terms of its playstyles. There are pluses and minuses. I feel like Marksmanship is probably a little bit better overall, but Elemental with the changes to... actually, I'm not sold yet on Primordial Wave. I feel like it works okay for enhancement, but I'm still not sold on how it should be for Elemental. I feel like the devs don't really don't know either, or I'm just a dumbass elemental, and that's perfectly fine. You don't need to listen to that, because you can play without that and actually have a lot of fun, and it is really cool. I feel like elemental is still being tested, and it might just get better and better as the expansion rolls out. It's already really fun. It obviously does a lot of damage, which definitely helps. It's not all about damage, but sometimes damage matters, and sometimes it doesn't, because we're getting to Shadow Priest, and Shadow Priest has quite a bit of damage. It's been kind of buggy on the PTR when we've tested it, so not everything was working, so you cannot really see the potential of Shadow Priest. But I do have to say that the more I've played all of the ranged DPS specs, particularly Affliction and Balanced Druid and other dot style specs, the less I like Shadow Priest. Shadow Crash is maybe a better version of Vile Taint, but at the same time a worse version than Vile Taint, because you can, at least with Warlock, use one seed of corruption to put corruption on everything if you don't have Vile Taint up, but there's no such thing for Shadow Priest if you don't have Shadow Crash up. At least the dots expire just after your Shadow Crash comes off cooldown, so you can kind of chain cast it to maintain uptime if the pack lasts long enough, or if, you know, I guess in single target this is not a problem anymore. But the same argument with Vile Taint applies, where you don't know if you really want to use Shadow Crash at the end of a fight with a pack, because if the pack has like 10% less HP and no dots up, you do no damage, and if you use Shadow Crash, you will end up doing damage for like 5 more seconds, and then in the next pack you'll do no damage once again. So that just fucking sucks. Not to mention that the more I play Shadow past its initial version in Dragonflight, the more I realized that Mindsphere being taken out has been terrible for it. I am not a fan of just doing damage with Psychic Link. That is super boring. It's the same rotation everywhere. I am bored out of my fucking skull trying to play this. The only saving grace that Shadow has is Void Weaver. Told you about the bloopers at the Patreon thing. And Void Blast and its interaction with the rotation, and the fact that you can cast Void Turn while moving. That's really cool. Right now, you're kind of only playing it with Dark Ascension. I would be curious to see how the rotation would be if you end up playing it with Void Eruption, having Void Blast and Void Bolt at the same time. But I still don't like Mind Spike, and I'm glad that you're playing Mind Flay Insanity. It feels like it's just a mess. So that's where Shadow will end up being on the tier list. Needs help, probably a little bit ahead of Fire. And if we're honest, probably a lot more specs would need help realistically to kind of, you know, I guess balance. Probably pretty much everything in mech category could need a little bit more help to be great, but I see people enjoy them, so that's fine. I'm not going to be too harsh on them. But you can also see the melee situation in 11.1 in terms of fun, of course, judged by me, because I'm a human. And you can check it right here. They're actually really fun. Some would say more fun than ranged. I don't know who that is, but it's pretty cool.